We're going for low-hanging fruit today and talking about Flamvells to continue our bashing of the hidden arsenal archetypes. It's well deserved since their archetype had one of the strongest spells in the game and it still went nowhere. Their archetype revolved around having fire monsters, and that's about it. The whole explanation of this archetype is summed up in one sentence. You can blame it on Yugioh slowly making archetypes that synergize with one another in early 2009. Still, it wouldn't have hurt them to make an archetype like Flamvell work, especially when the fire support was basically non-existent outside of Volcanics. Even they weren't viable until Pain 96 cried his heart out and Konami caved in and gave the young man his dream support. Is it meta? No, but it's at least playable. Too bad Flamvell doesn't have the same luck, and in today's video, we'll show you why Flamvell flamed out and is known as one of Yu-Gi-Oh's worst archetypes. Though many believe that the archetype was first introduced in the Dual Terminal / Hidden Arsenal series, its first support batch was in the TCG set Ancient Prophecy in 2009. It contained 4 cards for the archetype. The 2 monsters that debuted for Flamvell were Flamvell Fire Dog, a level 4 Fire Beast monster, and Flamvell Commando, a level 6 Pyro monster. Flamvell Dog allowed you to special summon a fire monster with 200 defense from your deck to your side of the field if it destroyed opponent's monster by battle. Commando couldn't be special summoned and could only be normal summoned by attributing 1 Flamvell monster you controlled. Once per turn, you can banish a monster with 200 defense from your graveyard to inflict burn damage to your opponent equal to that monster's attack. While the archetype was awful, Flamvell Fire Dog was an absolute powerhouse of a card back in 5D's format. Destroying an opponent's monster gave you access to 200 defense fire monster, including ones outside the archetype, and was a 1-card synchro summon alongside the later released Flamvell Magician, a level 4 tuner that you could use to make a level 8 synchro like Stardust Dragon easily. The card was often popped in toolbox decks, as it could stand independently without being dedicated to Flamevells because it could summon an extra deck monster all by itself. Its play was further boosted due to Konami making one of, if not the essential, support spell for fire monsters. Rekindling was a normal spell card that allowed you to special summon as many fire monsters with exactly 200 defense from your graveyard as possible, but banish them all during the end phase. The card was absolutely insane during the Synchro era. The card had no cost to activate and was a personal soul charge you could use to bring back any 200 defense fire monster, regardless of it being a tuner, a non-tuner, Xyz, or even a synchro. A player could draw this and establish multiple monsters in the field to make multiple extract monsters for free, or just use them to swing for game. On top of how ridiculous this card is, it wasn't a once per turn card. Rekindling had boomers salivate at the mouth to play this card. The funniest part of this, however, was that it didn't shine in Flamvell due to Flamvell being, well, horrible. Our busted spell card was a Terror in Laval's, a fire archetype released in Hidden Arsenal 5. Lavals effectively abused Rekindling due to how quickly they can get fire monsters to the graveyard, and had monsters like Laval Volcano Handmaid, Cannoneer, Lakeside Lady, and Forest Sprite, and even a synchro like Laval Dual Slasher all having 200 defense. This deck had all the resources to make any synchro consistently they wanted on turn 1, including their most popular choice, shooting Quasar Dragon. You could even attack with the monsters summoned by Rekindling before you use them for materials. It came to a point that Rekindling had to be limited in early 2014 due to its powerful and free effect. It wouldn't be until 2019 that it would be allowed back to 3 copies. The moral of the story, if there was any chance that people played Flamvell, it was because Rekindling was that good. The final card introduced was an in-archetype counter-trap card in Flamvell Counter. When a spell or trap card is activated, you can banish 1 fire monster with 200 defense from your graveyard to negate its effect and destroy it. It was a solid counter-trap for the archetype, needing as much support as possible. The only issue was that it took the Flamvell monster out of your graveyard, making you have fewer targets for Rekindling. Even if this archetype is abysmal, you would like to have your cards in the graveyard to then special summon them back. So Flamevells had a pretty great start with 2 cards that could lead to extract plays all on their own. You'd think that would continue for there to be more great cards for Flamvell, but that's where you'd be wrong. Hidden Arsenal debuted 4 cards, which were monsters because Hidden Arsenal barely believes in spell and trap card support. We all know about Fire Dog's partner, Flamevell Magician. This level 4 tuner gained 400 attack if an Ally of Justice monster was on the field because, well, reasons. Anyways, Flamevell Guard was a level 1 tuner normal monster with 100 attack and 2000 defense. Flamevell Dragonoff was a level 2 dragon effect monster. When it's destroyed by balance into the graveyard, you can banish this card from your grave and 1 face-up fire monster you control to add another Flamevell Dragonoff from your deck to your hand. Lastly, Flamevell Uraquizzes was a level 6 synchro. When it attacks a defensive monster, it inflicts piercing battle damage. When it inflicts battle damage, it gains 300 attack. The weirdest thing about these cards is that 3 of them saw play outside their archetypes. Flamevell Magician only saw play due to Fire Dog being able to get it from the deck and being a generic level 4 tuner, which was scarce in the early 5Ds era. Guard saw play due to being a level 1 Dragon normal tuner, which made it playable in Dragon Rulers who could search it with Blaster, or use Dragon Shrine to send to the graveyard to be special summoned later by Redox. The hilarious part is this card never saw play in Flamvell, since for some reason this card had 2000 defense, giving it no synergy to Fire Dog or Rekindling. The Rayquaza saw some play as a generic level 6 synchro for players who couldn't get their hands on Goyo Guardian or Brionac. So while the cards were playable, they did better with other decks than their archetype. The unnecessary removal effect of Garuda, Magician's wonky effect, Guard being 2000 defense. The deck at best was a beatdown deck, and the only cards that gave it any chance were all put on the back of Fire Dog and Rekindling. To give the deck consistency, players would use cards that gave board presence to their side of the field, so you could have materials for the synchro plays, or cards that helped eliminate problematic cards that Flamvells couldn't get over. Gravekeeper's Spy was a popular tech in the early synchro format. It was used heavily in Flamvell due to its high defense that would catch your opponent off guard when it was set, and its flip effect would let you special summon another Gravekeeper monster at 1500 less attack from your deck. So you could either set it and let your opponent run into it, or if they didn't, flip it face up on your turn and get a Spy for synchro plays or Gravekeeper's Descendant, whose effect lets you tribute another face-up Gravekeeper to pop a card on the field. Cyber Dragon was also tossed in because it was a free body and allowed you to play Caius for removal or go into Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon. Tragodia helped the deck by being a card you could special summon when you take damage, could take control of one of your opponent's monster by sending a monster the same level from your hand to the graveyard, or you could change its level by copying the level of monster in your graveyard, so you can then play Flammable Magician to go into synchro plays. Even Raikou the Lightsworn Hunter saw play as it milled your Flamvells for Rekindling and popped pesky cards. But the results were a mixed bag due to having a chance of milling your Rekindling. But it's worth it to pop a card in the field, right? No. For a deck you couldn't play purely within its archetype support, putting high-risk, high-reward cards to get your win con was the best way to get results played a deck that couldn't stand on its own and needed multiple engines to be viable. Hidden Arsenal 2 just gave them 2 new cards, Flamvell Baby and Flamvell Grunica. Baby was a level 1 Pyro Tuner. You get sent from hand to the graveyard to target a fire monster you controlled to give it 400 attack. Grunica was a level 4 Dragon, and if it destroys the monster by battle, inflict damage to your opponent equal to its level times 200. More Bodies is the best way to summarize these 2 cards. They were just more targets to Fire Dog at best. Baby did help fill the void that Flamvell Guard was supposed to be, and did have a way to get to the graveyard to be used for Rekindling. However, it didn't help that the playstyle was stuck around it being Fire Dog deck, and opponents easily knew that all they had to do was get Fire Dog off the field. With a deck lacking special summoning power, all they do was remove it with a trap like Dimensional Prison or compulse it back. So, with that being the case, the deck strategy was stuck with punching with the dog and praying until you filled your graveyard with enough fodder for the best fire support spell card. The archetype would continue to receive more love outside Hidden Arsenal again with the release of the TCG set Duelist Revolution. Flamvell Pound was a level 1 Pyro that lets you add a monster with 200 defense from your deck to your hand when it's destroyed by battle. Flamvell Archer was a level 3 Pyro Tuner that allowed you to tribute a Pyro monster to give all Flamvell monsters 800 attack until the end phase. Flamvell Fiend was level 6, and when it inflicts damage to your opponent, it inflicted an extra 200 points of damage for every Pyro monster in your graveyard. Flamvell Pound did help in searching Fire Dog and any other 200 defense monster you could splash, like Boost Warrior, who's a level 1 Fire Warrior that could special summon itself from the hand. Flamvell Archer was also a decent addition, as you could potentially combo with your monsters by being summoned by Fire Dog, tributing himself, raising the attack of all Flamvells on the field by 800 points, and then brought back by Rekindling, and then used as a synchro material. Finally, Flamvell Fiend was a level 6 with 1200 defense. Enough said, it didn't see play. So with more monster support, the deck had to be at least playable by now, right? If only Yu-Gi-Oh worked that way. Their in-archetype support just wasn't strong outside of Fire Dog. There was no suitable extenders, and the effects were mediocre, giving no advantage worth playing. The deck build pretty much stayed the same, with the only Flamvell monsters seen play being Fire Dog and Magician, with your 3 copies of Rekindling and your usual tech to keep the archetype off of life support. Konami again tried to give more support by introducing Neo Flamvell monsters to your archetype in Hidden Arsenal 4. Most of their effects were based on manipulating your opponent's graveyard, banishing cards in the grave, and gaining effects based on the number of cards in it. Trust me when I say this support didn't do anything. Let's look at the 6 new cards. Neo Flamvell Saber was a level 4 Pyro monster that gained 600 attack if your opponent's graveyard had 4 or less cards in it, or lost 800 attack if your opponent had 8 or more cards. Neo Flamvell Shaman was a level 3 Pyro that, if it destroyed a monster by battle, and you have 3 or more Flamvell monsters in your graveyard, target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard and banish it. Then, if the only cards left in your opponent's graveyard are spell and traps, inflict 500 damage. Neo Flamvell Origin was a level 2 Pyro monster. If you have a Flamvell monster and your opponent controls 3 or less cards in the graveyard, you can special summon Origin from your hand. Neo Flamvell Garuda lets you banish 1 monster from your opponent's graveyard during your end phase if you control another Flamvell monster. Neo Flamvell Hedgehog was a Pyro Tuner that banishes a card from your opponent's grave if it's destroyed by battle. And if a card effect destroys it, target 1 fire monster with 200 defense in your graveyard and add it back to your hand. To finally round it off, Ancient Flamvell Deity was a new level 7 synchro monster. It required a fire tuner plus one or more non-tuner pyro monsters. When it was synchro summoned, you can banish cards from your opponent's graveyard up to a number of cards in your opponent's hand. And if you do, Deity gains 200 attack for each card banished by this effect. This support did nothing for Flamvell. Though banishing monsters from your opponent's graveyard benefits the game, Neo Flamvell monsters' conditions to banish was sluggish. Shaman needed to battle while having 3 Flamvells in the grave to remove a card, or Hedgehog needed to die in battle didn't give you any advantage. These requirements weren't worth all that time and effort to remove one single card from your opponent's graveyard. Also, some of the new Neo Flamvell monsters decided to pull a Flamvell guard and not have 200 defense, ruining synergies with Rekindling and Fire Dog and removing more of an option from your deck because the stats just don't fit the theme. To continue how poorly this archetype is based, a lack of extension still hindered this deck from being able to be played pure. The one extender that got in Origin was inconsistent because you needed a Flamvell and your opponent to have less than 3 cards, making it more than likely you'll never be able to play this card first turn due to your opponent needing to do their combo and fill in their graveyard with more than 3 cards. The only card that saw some play was the Synchro Monster, again due to other fire monster decks. You know, that one that did all the cool stuff with Rekindling that Flamvell wished they could? That pretty much summed up why Flamvells were terrible. There was no synergy between cards, one good searcher with Fire Dog, and mediocre effects that weren't worth their effects or costs. So it's no surprise that Flamvell flamed out. So when Laval's debuted in 2011, players rightfully took the Rekindling out of their deck and crowned Laval's their new savior until Rekindling was limited to 1. The final piece of support for Flamvells came out in 2019 in Dark Neostorm for reasons unknown to us. Neo Flamvell Lady was a level 4 fire monster with 1600 attack and 200 defense. Its quick effect allowed you to send one fire monster from your hand to the graveyard to target one card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it. If a card is banished from your opponent's graveyard while this monster is on the field, you can send a fire monster with 200 less defense from your deck to the graveyard. What took them so long to make a good Flamvell card? Everything Flamvell needed was stacked into this one card. It helped with banishing cards so your Neo Flamvell monsters could get off their effects, and even sent cards to the grave so you could set up for your turn. Rekindling was brought back to 3 a month later, so with finally a decent card, did the deck, you know what, we won't pretend to know what the answer was anything other than no. One card couldn't help fix this horrendous pile of cards due to almost every printed card in this archetype being unplayable or lackluster. On top of that, they couldn't have received the support in a more terrible era than Lynx. Lady was a good card, but it was painfully slow compared to cards in the new era. On top of that, there still weren't any extenders to stop your turn from being normal summon pass, leaving your Flamvell Lady vulnerable to eating an Imperm or an Ash Blossom. So technically, the deck's best opener was still Flamvell Fire Dog. It takes a lot for a deck to be bad and unplayable. Konami found a way to do it with Flamvells though. When the TCG, Master Duel, and Duel Links meta unanimously agree that a deck isn't worth building, you know you've earned the title of worst deck. They had no synergy with one another outside of most monsters having 200 defense. Flamvell Fire Dog was the only saving grace of the archetype, yet it basically saw all of its play in other decks. The Neo Flamvells were a useless and puzzling addition to the archetype with effects and conditions that were way too slow to be effective with the ability to banish monsters from the grave. By the time Lady was added to the archetype, the ancient times of 2010 were long gone, and attacking with Fire Dog into a link-filled board just wasn't going to cut it. You don't need to watch this video to know that Flamvell sucked. They are a perfect example of how not to build an archetype, and showcase how much suffering fire decks eventually went through to get good. Flamvells easily deserve, and we mean deserve, a spot on field cards and mechanics.